The 19th century was an age that prided itself on progress. The smoke of industry curled across the skies of Europe. Railways knit together kingdoms and empires. And the British monarchy presented itself as the moral anchor of a rapidly changing society. And at the heart of it stood Queen Victoria, a woman who reigned longer than any of her predecessors, who became the symbolic grandmother of Europe, and whose court radiated images of discipline, respectability, and duty. Yet behind the velvet curtains and the carefully choreographed rituals of her court lay shadows. Every palace has secrets, but in the long reign of Victoria, one secret grew darker than most, whispered in corridors and guarded by courtiers with fierce loyalty. To understand what this secret was, we must first understand the court itself, a stage designed as much for illusion as for governance. When Victoria ascended the throne in 1837, she was a young woman of 18, still more girl than monarch, and utterly determined to leave behind the suffocating control of her mother and her mother's advisor, Sir John Conroy. She declared herself free at last, and in those first years her court became a place of youthful energy. But soon, with her marriage to Prince Albert, the atmosphere hardened into one of precision, discipline, and a near obsession with moral rectitude. Albert envisioned the monarchy as a shining example of bourgeois virtue. Where previous courts had indulged in scandal, gambling, or dalliance, Victoria's would become a household of order. Guests remarked on how the palace felt more like a middle-class home enlarged to palatial proportions than like the decadent courts of old. That was the outward show. Victoria, dutiful mother. Albert, stern but principled consort. Their growing family and the steady machinery of the British Empire moving beneath them. But a court that is built so strongly upon an image must also guard that image with ferocity. And in Victoria's case, there emerged a relationship, intimate, controversial, whispered about then and now, that threatened to destabilize the narrative of the moral queen. This relationship was with John Brown, a Scottish servant who rose from humble gillie, essentially a Highland attendant or gamekeeper, to the Queen's closest companion after Albert's death. The darkest secret of Victoria's court was not one of political conspiracy, nor of bloody intrigue, like in the courts of the Tudors, but rather of intimacy. The possibility that the widowed queen, revered as the very symbol of respectability, had allowed her heart, and perhaps more, to be captured by a commoner. Albert's death in 1861 devastated Victoria beyond measure. He had been her confidant, her partner, her moral compass, and she collapsed into a grief so profound that it reshaped her reign. For years, she refused to appear in public, wore black mourning clothes that she would never again set aside, and transformed her royal residences into shrines of memory. Into this vacuum stepped John Brown, a rugged, plain-speaking Scotsman who had served the prince during their Highland retreats at Balmoral. Unlike the polished courtiers who tiptoed around the Queen with ceremony and flattery, Brown spoke directly. He was brusque, sometimes even rude by aristocratic standards, but he offered something no one else dared: honesty, loyalty, and companionship unclouded by protocol. Slowly, inexorably, he became indispensable. At first it was merely practical. Brown knew how to arrange her horseback rides, how to lead her safely along the Highland paths she loved, how to manage her household with a firm hand. But soon he was with her constantly, riding at her side, guarding her door, sharing her meals, accompanying her on journeys. The court whispered. Ministers grew uneasy. When letters were found signed, "Ever your devoted John Brown," and when Victoria herself signed notes to him with warmth exceeding the boundaries of sovereign and servant, rumors spread like wildfire. Satirical papers of the time mocked the Queen as Mrs. Brown, a title that suggested not only friendship, but marriage. Pamphlets hinted that a secret wedding had taken place, that the Queen had broken every convention by binding herself to a servant. No proof was ever produced, but the very possibility gnawed at the carefully cultivated image of royal virtue. Why was this secret so dangerous? In part because Victoria had been set up as the paragon of middle-class morality. The monarchy in her time survived not by political power, it had been largely stripped of that, but by moral authority. She was to embody the virtues of family, respectability, and self-control that the rising Victorian bourgeoisie cherished. For such a figure to be entangled with a commoner, to blur the line between sovereign and servant, would be catastrophic. It would strip away the distance that gave her mystique, and it would undermine the notion that the Queen's private life was a model for her subjects. Worse still, it threatened to reveal a very human vulnerability: loneliness. For if Victoria, the mighty Queen Empress, needed the companionship of a rugged Highlander to sustain her, then the whole edifice of royal aloofness came tumbling down. The ministers of her government were aghast. Lord Derby, Disraeli, Gladstone, they all struggled to persuade the Queen to limit Brown's influence. Courtiers muttered about the danger of letting a single man dominate her household. Her own children, particularly the Prince of Wales, found the relationship embarrassing, an open secret that tarnished their mother's dignity. But Victoria was unyielding. She trusted Brown more than any minister, more than many of her own family. She wrote of him in her journals with glowing affection, praising his devotion, his strength, his simple honesty. After an assassination attempt in 1872, when Brown reportedly threw himself into protecting her, she exalted him as her savior. The legend of the Queen's Highland servant only deepened. Now, did this intimacy cross into the physical? Historians debated fiercely. Some argue that it was nothing more than deep friendship, that Victoria, shattered by grief, simply found comfort in the blunt loyalty of a man who reminded her of Albert's steadiness. Others suggest that the intensity of her language, the extraordinary access she gave Brown, and the whispers of the time point to a relationship that went further. We cannot know with certainty. After her death, many of her journals and letters were edited, even destroyed by her daughter Beatrice, who carefully excised passages that might feed gossip. That act of censorship itself suggests how sensitive the matter was, how desperate the royal family was to keep this secret shrouded. Yet the secret lingered, surfacing in caricatures, novels, and popular tales. The very idea of a queen, an empress no less, ruler of India and half the globe, bound by affection, perhaps by love, to a Scottish servant electrified the public imagination. It revealed a paradox at the heart of monarchy, that beneath the crown was a human being, with needs, griefs, and desires like any other. For some, this made Victoria sympathetic, more relatable. For others, it was scandalous, a betrayal of the image of lofty purity that her reign was supposed to represent. And so, the darkest secret of Queen Victoria's court was not treason, not conspiracy, but humanity. It was the secret that the Queen could not bear to be alone, that she needed companionship in a way that defied convention. The relationship with John Brown was hidden in plain sight, denied in official channels, joked about in pamphlets, and finally half erased in the archives. But it shaped the Queen's private world for decades. When Brown died in 1883, Victoria was inconsolable. She ordered statues erected, portraits commissioned, and kept mementos of him close. At Windsor, a portrait of Brown was placed in her private apartments, alongside that of Albert. She even had a lock of his hair buried with her, in a testament that spoke volumes, though few were allowed to witness it. The shadow of this secret extended even into the next century. When Victoria herself died in 1901 and her personal papers were examined, the family made sure to suppress much of the evidence of her bond with Brown. Later generations stumbled upon hints and fragments, enough to keep the speculation alive. Some claim to have discovered records of a private marriage, though no credible proof has ever surfaced. Plays and films in the 20th century revived the tale, most famously dramatized in Mrs. Brown, where Judi Dench brought to life the aging queen and her dependence on the blunt Highlander. The secret, then, was not a single scandalous act,